Chapter 1. The Illusion of Skill. We live in a world that worships the winner, but we rarely stop to ask how the game was actually won. Think about someone you probably know, maybe it is a former classmate, a distant relative, or a colleague who has achieved a dizzying level of financial success. When this person is interviewed or asked for advice, they will invariably offer a very precise, highly confident explanation for their prosperity. They will talk about their relentless work ethic, their visionary strategy, and their ability to see trends that others missed. What they will almost never say is that they were simply standing in the right place when a massive wave of pure chance happened to roll through. We are universally guilty of a profound confusion. We constantly mistake luck for skill, and we disguise random chance as inevitable destiny. To understand why we do this, we have to look back to our deepest origins. Millennia ago, our ancestors survived in a harsh, unpredictable world by desperately seeking patterns. Imagine an early tribesman standing in a parched field under a punishing sun. One afternoon, he happens to scratch his nose, and moments later, a torrential monsoon rain begins to fall. His brain, wired for survival and desperate for control, links the two events. He develops an elaborate, rhythmic ritual of nose scratching to summon the rains. Today, we laugh at this primitive superstition, yet we do the exact same thing in our modern, air-conditioned corporate boardrooms. We see a company's profits surge on the back of a booming global economy, and we immediately credit the newly appointed chief executive officer praising their strategic genius. We read biographies of the ultra-wealthy, searching for the secret morning routines or management philosophies that created their empires, ignoring the thousands of others who shared those exact same habits but ended up with nothing. Nowhere is this illusion more dangerous and more spectacular than in the world of high finance and investing. This is an arena where the line between a brilliant strategy and a lucky gamble is entirely invisible to the naked eye. To truly feel the weight of this, put yourself in the shoes of a seasoned, cautious professional navigating the financial markets. Let us say this man has spent years studying the mathematics of probability. He knows that the market is a wild, untamed beast capable of extreme, sudden violence. Because he understands this, he structures his entire life and portfolio around survival. He takes calculated, highly defensive positions. He limits his downside. He earns a very respectable, steady income, quietly saving lakhs of rupees every year and investing his personal wealth in the safest possible government bonds. He drives a reliable, unassuming sedan, lives in a comfortable but modest flat, and values his peace of mind, his intellectual pursuits, and his ability to sleep soundly at night above all else. Now imagine his neighbor. The neighbor is younger, vastly more aggressive, and possesses the intellectual depth of a shallow puddle. Yet this neighbor has decided to ride the crest of a massive, highly leveraged financial bubble. He employs a strategy that generates enormous, rapid profits as long as the market remains calm, but contains a hidden, catastrophic risk if things ever turn sour. Because the market has been tranquil for a few years, this neighbor is experiencing a colossal winning streak. He is showered with multi-crore bonuses. He buys a sprawling multi-story bungalow right across the street. He parks 2 imported German luxury SUVs in his driveway. His wife begins to wear diamonds the size of marbles and talks loudly about their bespoke vacations to exotic, unpronounceable islands. How does the cautious, brilliant professional feel when he looks across the street? No amount of philosophical training can entirely shield a human being from the brutal sting of the social pecking order. There is a very specific, quiet agony in watching someone you know to be fundamentally reckless get wildly, unfathomably rich while you play by the rules. The cautious man's spouse feels the subtle, condescending glances from the neighbor's wife. The cautious man begins to question his own sanity. He wonders if his education, his careful mathematics, and his discipline are actually just forms of cowardice. He feels like a failure, not because he hasn't succeeded, but because society is currently measuring success by the size of the driveway across the street, completely ignoring the invisible risks that built it. What the cautious man is fighting against is the immense biological power of a winning streak. When the reckless neighbor succeeds month after month, his biology physically changes. A chemical cascade driven heavily by serotonin floods his brain. He begins to walk with a dominant, upright posture. He speaks louder with absolute, unwavering certainty. He genuinely believes he is a master of the universe. This serotonin-fueled confidence acts as a beacon, convincing everyone around him, his bosses, his investors, his peers, that he truly possesses a magical touch. The human hormonal system does not know how to distinguish between a victory earned through hard-fought skill and a victory handed over by blind luck. The reckless neighbor is entirely fooled by his own randomness, and his biological broadcast fools the rest of the world. But the laws of probability are patient, and they are entirely devoid of mercy. Eventually the environment shifts. A rare, unexpected economic shock hits the system, the kind of event the reckless neighbor's shallow models deemed impossible. In a matter of days, the highly leveraged house of cards collapses. The neighbor does not just lose his recent profits, he loses everything. He is fired, his reputation is vaporized, and the imported SUVs disappear from the driveway. The cautious man who protected himself from this exact unseen disaster remains completely unharmed. His modest wealth is untouched. His dignity is intact. He survives because he knew that true success is not about maximizing your short-term haul. It is about ensuring that you can never be entirely wiped out when the invisible wheel of fortune turns against you. This brings us to a profound, counterintuitive way to evaluate success in life. We must learn to judge a person's wealth and status not just by what we can see, but by the alternative lives they could have led under different random circumstances. Think of a local, hard-working dentist. He has spent 30 years in his clinic, filling cavities, doing root canals, and building a practice. His life is highly predictable. If you were to somehow clone this dentist and force him to relive his career 1,000 times in 1,000 parallel universes, the outcomes would be incredibly narrow and consistent. In almost every single one of those 1,000 lives, he ends up a comfortable, prosperous professional. His success is overwhelmingly driven by his skill and his labor, making it highly resistant to the whims of chance. Now, compare the dentist to the reckless financial speculator or the person who won the lottery. If you force the lottery winner to relive his life 1,000 times, in 999 of those timelines he remains exactly where he started, holding a worthless piece of paper. His wealth is entirely dependent on a single lucky spin of the roulette wheel of reality. As a society, we look at the lottery winner and the dentist, and we see two people who can afford the same lifestyle. We treat their money as identical. But philosophically and practically they are vastly different. One has built a fortress on solid rock, the other has pitched a luxurious tent on a fault line. As we move forward, we must train our minds to look past the dazzling surface of extreme success. We must ask ourselves if the wealth, the status, and the victories we are chasing are the result of repeatable, resilient skill, or if they are merely the temporary gifts of a lucky tailwind. Recognizing the invisible hand of randomness in our lives is not about diminishing our hard work. It is about cultivating a deep protective humility. It is about realizing that while we cannot control the weather, we alone are responsible for building a ship strong enough to survive the storm. Chapter 2. The Unseen Generator. When we look at the world around us, we suffer from a dangerous optical illusion. We believe that the history we are witnessing is the only history that could have possibly happened. We evaluate the quality of a decision based entirely on its final outcome, completely ignoring the invisible alternative paths that were just as likely to occur. This is a terrifying way to live because it blinds us to the true nature of risk. To understand this, we must learn to look past the visible results and critically examine the hidden engine that produces them. We must learn to see the unseen generator of reality. Imagine a young, ambitious real estate developer in a rapidly expanding city like Gurgaon. Desperate to make a name for himself, he takes out a massive, crippling loan against his family's ancestral home to purchase a vast tract of barren, worthless swampland. He is making a singular, massive gamble. He has heard a rumor that the government might build a new international airport nearby. Let us say the true odds of this airport being approved are 1 in 6. If the government chooses his location, the land value will skyrocket and he will clear hundreds of crores in profit overnight. If the government chooses any of the other 5 locations, he is completely bankrupt, his family is left homeless, and his reputation is ruined. Now assume the wheel of fortune spins in his favor. The airport is approved. He sells the land, builds a towering glass headquarters, and is suddenly featured on the covers of national business magazines as a visionary titan of industry. Young graduates flock to him, desperate to learn his strategy. The public looks at his sprawling wealth and assumes he possesses a rare, impenetrable genius. But they are only seeing the one universe where he survived. They do not see the 5 parallel universes where he is standing in a dusty unemployment line, crushed by debt. If you were to look at his bank account, the money looks exactly the same as the money earned by a disciplined, conservative manufacturer who spent 4 decades slowly and safely building a logistics empire. To an accountant, those 2 fortunes are identical, but to a philosopher of risk, they are entirely different beasts. One fortune was generated by repeatable, resilient skill. The other was generated by a game of high-stakes roulette. Because we cannot physically see those alternative histories, we must build a simulator in our minds. Imagine you possess a machine that could rewind time and replay a person's career 1,000 times, just to see the different variations of how their life could have unfolded. If you run the conservative manufacturer through this simulator, you will see 1,000 slightly different paths, but almost all of them end in steady, comfortable prosperity. His wealth is deeply resistant to the whims of chance. But if you run our reckless real estate developer through the same simulator, a chilling picture emerges. In a handful of timelines, he is a billionaire. In the vast, overwhelming majority of them, he is utterly destroyed. When we evaluate success, whether it is our own or someone else's, we must force ourselves to consider all the invisible paths that did not happen. This brings us to the tragedy of corporate leadership. If you spend enough time in the business world, you will inevitably encounter 2 very distinct types of mentors. The first type is the polished, immaculately dressed executive who speaks in smooth, confident platitudes. He navigates office politics effortlessly and rises rapidly to the top by delivering consistent quarterly profits. He never questions the structural risks his department is taking. He only cares about the bottom line. He is universally loved by the shareholders right up until the day an unexpected market shock exposes his hidden vulnerabilities, wiping out the company's capital and forcing him into an abrupt, disgraced retirement. The second type of leader is entirely different. This person is often eccentric, erratic, and deeply irritable. They might dress sloppily, keep irregular hours, and obsess over highly improbable disaster scenarios. They will keep you awake at night demanding contingency plans for events that seem completely absurd. This leader is intensely difficult to work for, but they possess a rare, profound wisdom. They care only about the generator of the profits, not the profits themselves. They know that a flawed process will eventually, inevitably, produce a catastrophic result. While the polished executive is climbing the ladder by ignoring the invisible risks, the eccentric leader is building a fortress to survive the storm. It takes years of painful experience to realize that the eccentric paranoid leader is the one you should actually trust. Why do we constantly fall for the polished executives and the reckless visionaries? Why do we continually ignore the hidden risks? It is because human beings are biologically incapable of learning from the collective history of others. A child will not understand that a stove is hot until they physically touch the burning metal themselves. We carry this same biological stubbornness into adulthood. We read the history books. We know about the great market crashes, the bursting of real estate bubbles, and the catastrophic failures of over-leveraged empires. Yet every time a new boom begins, we convince ourselves that the rules of history have somehow been suspended. We assure ourselves that this time it is different. We walk right up to the very same burning stove that scarred our ancestors, firmly believing that our skin is somehow fireproof. Our inability to grasp the unseen generator is compounded by the way we consume information. We live in an era that actively poisons our minds with relentless high-frequency noise. If you want to understand the true trajectory of a situation, the worst possible thing you can do is look at it closely every single day. Consider an independent professional, perhaps a highly successful architect, who decides to take control of his savings and invest in the financial markets. He builds a sensible, conservative portfolio that is mathematically expected to generate a solid 15% return over the year with a standard degree of volatility. If he were to check his portfolio just once a year, he would experience a joyful, positive surprise over 90% of the time. But this architect is equipped with a modern smartphone. He downloads a trading application and begins checking his net worth every single day, sometimes every hour. At this microscopic time scale, he is no longer observing the true growth of his wealth. He is merely observing the random, chaotic variance of the market. Minute by minute, The probability of his portfolio being up or down is effectively a coin toss. Our biology is not designed to handle this. The human brain processes the pain of a financial loss much more intensely than the joy of an equivalent gain. By checking his phone constantly, the architect is subjecting himself to thousands of tiny, agonizing emotional cuts. At the end of the year, even though his portfolio has grown by 15%, he is left emotionally drained, anxious, and miserable. He has drowned himself in meaningless noise, completely missing the underlying signal. The wisdom of the unseen generator teaches us that we must distance ourselves from the daily chatter. We must stop judging our neighbors by the visible cars in their driveways and start evaluating the hidden risks they are taking to afford them. We must fiercely protect our minds from the toxic pollution of minute-by-minute news, recognizing that a constant stream of information does not make us wiser. It only makes us more anxious and more prone to foolish decisions. True clarity comes from stepping back, respecting the profound weight of history, and building a life that can endure the thousands of invisible timelines we will never actually see. Chapter 3. The Limits of Observation. Think about the last time you sat in a sprawling, air-conditioned banquet hall for a major industry conference, perhaps somewhere in a corporate hub like New Delhi or Bengaluru. The lights dimmed, the ambient music swelled, and a highly compensated keynote speaker walked onto the stage. For the next hour, this person dazzled the audience with a speech about the future of business. They spoke passionately about leveraging disruptive ecosystems, synergizing paradigm shifts, and cultivating holistic, out-of-the-box strategies to capture the next wave of global innovation. The delivery was flawless. The speaker's confidence was hypnotic. All around you, people were nodding in solemn agreement and frantically taking notes on their tablets. But if you were to step back, clear your mind, and ask yourself what actionable, concrete truth was actually communicated, you would likely find a terrifying void. This is one of the most pervasive illusions in the modern professional world, our tendency to confuse articulate nonsense with profound wisdom. If you were to take a list of popular business buzzwords, put them into a computer program, and ask the machine to string them together randomly into grammatically correct sentences, the output would sound exactly like that highly paid keynote speaker. Our brains are incredibly vulnerable to the aesthetic of intelligence. We hear complex, elevated language, and we automatically assume that a deep, rigorous intellect is at work. But true, resilient knowledge does not need to hide behind an impenetrable wall of jargon. True knowledge can be broken down, tested, and explained in plain, simple language. When someone relies on a relentless stream of complex buzzwords, they are often unconsciously masking the fact that they are just generating random noise. They are fooling the audience, and quite often, they are completely fooling themselves. Our inability to observe the truth goes far beyond the words we hear. It profoundly distorts how we view success and survival. We have a tendency to look at the people who are currently dominating their industries, the executives generating the most profit, the investors yielding the highest returns, and we automatically assume they are the smartest and most capable. We borrow a concept from biology and apply it to the business world, telling ourselves that this is simply the survival of the fittest. We assume that the free market is a perfect evolutionary engine, ruthlessly weeding out the weak and rewarding the strong. But this is a dangerous misunderstanding of how evolution actually works in environments heavily dictated by chance. In the biological world, evolution takes place over millions of years, slowly adapting species to their environments. But in the economic world, the environment can completely rewrite its own rules overnight. Because of this, the person who looks like the absolute fittest predator in the jungle today might actually be the most vulnerable creature tomorrow. To understand how evolution can be tricked by randomness, we have to look closely at a very specific type of financial operator. Imagine an aggressive, highly educated fund manager operating out of a glass-walled office in a Mumbai high-rise. He specializes in a very specific, volatile sector of the market, perhaps distressed industrial debt or highly speculative technology companies. For 5 years, the global economy has been enjoying a massive, uninterrupted period of growth. During this time, the market occasionally experiences brief, terrifying drops, small panics where ordinary investors sell their holdings in fear. But our fund manager never panics. In fact, his entire strategy is built on doing the exact opposite. Whenever the market dips, he aggressively buys more. He borrows heavily to purchase assets at what he calls a steep discount. For half a decade, this strategy works with absolute flawless perfection. Every single time the market drops, it bounces back even higher a few weeks later. Because he bought during the dip, his returns are astronomical. He generates hundreds of crores in profits for his firm. He is promoted, celebrated, and revered as a financial genius. He looks at cautious, defensive investors with thinly veiled contempt, viewing them as cowardly and weak. He tells everyone who will listen that his success is due to his superior analytical mind and his iron stomach. He genuinely believes that he has evolved into a higher state of financial existence. He looks to the entire observing world like the undisputed apex predator of the market. But this man is not an apex predator. He is simply a creature whose specific rigid mutation perfectly matched a temporary season of weather. His strategy of aggressively buying every dip is not a product of universal genius. It is a highly specific trait that is exceptionally profitable only in a market that always recovers. He has no defense mechanism for a market that does not bounce back. Then, the invisible generator of reality spins a new number. A structural, systemic crisis hits the global economy. It is not a standard panic. It is a fundamental shift in the rules of the game. The market drops sharply. True to his nature, our manager buys the dip. He pours his capital into the falling assets. But this time the market does not recover. It drops further. His confident smile begins to fade, replaced by a tense, nervous sweat. But he is a prisoner of his own past success. He refuses to accept that the environment has changed. He yells at his analysts, claiming the market is acting irrationally and that this is the buying opportunity of a lifetime. He doubles down, borrowing even more money to average down his purchase price. The market continues its ruthless descent, crossing lines in the sand that he had mathematically declared impossible. The assets he bought become completely illiquid and virtually worthless. The leverage he used to build his empire now acts as a tightening noose. In the span of a single brutal summer, the accumulated profits of 5 years are entirely vaporized. The firm's capital is wiped out. He is escorted out of his glass-walled office by security, his reputation destroyed, his career over. The cautious, defensive investors he once mocked are still standing, their modest portfolios bruised but largely intact. This is the ultimate tragedy of short-term evolution in a random world. At any given moment in time, the people generating the absolute highest returns are often not the most skilled. They are simply the ones whose hidden vulnerabilities have not yet been exposed by the environment. They are taking massive, invisible risks that happen to align perfectly with the current cycle. We observe their temporary winning streak and we call it genius. We listen to their jargon-filled speeches and we call it wisdom. To navigate this world safely, we must accept the severe limits of our own observation. We must realize that an articulate speech is not proof of a rigorous mind, and a massive short-term profit is not proof of a sustainable strategy. We must stop being mesmerized by the people who are riding the current wave and start asking what will happen to them when the tide inevitably pulls back. True resilience is not about optimizing yourself for the current environment. It is about building a mind and a life that can survive the environments you cannot yet see. Chapter 4. The Hidden Risks of Asymmetry. Our minds crave balance. We are deeply comforted by symmetry, by the idea of an even playing field, and by the notion of a perfectly balanced scale. When we think about the future, we tend to visualize risk as a simple toss of a coin. Heads we win, tails we lose. We assume the odds are even, and more dangerously, we assume the consequences of winning and losing carry the exact same weight. But reality does not operate on a perfectly balanced scale. The real world is wildly, terrifyingly asymmetrical. The most important lesson you will ever learn about navigating uncertainty is that it does not matter how often you are right or how often you are wrong. The only thing that truly matters is how much you make when you are right and how much you lose when you are wrong. To feel the true weight of this concept, imagine a family sitting in a dimly lit hospital room listening to a senior physician deliver a devastating diagnosis to a beloved uncle. The doctor's face is grave as he explains that the uncle has contracted a rare, aggressive ailment. Desperate for any sense of certainty, the family asks for the survival statistics. The doctor replies that the median survival time for this condition is just 8 months. The family is instantly crushed. They hear the word median and interpret it to mean that their uncle has an absolute unchangeable death sentence hanging over his head, set to execute in less than a year. They begin to mourn him before he is even gone. But this despair comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of asymmetry. The family is confusing the median with the average. In statistics, a median simply means that half of the patients will pass away before the 8-month mark, and half will survive beyond it. But what happens to the half that survives? If we look closer at the data, we might find that the people who make it past those agonizing first 8 months go on to recover completely, living full, vibrant lives into their 80s and 90s. Because the people who survive go on to live for decades, the true average life expectancy for someone with this diagnosis might actually be several years, not 8 months. The outcome is highly asymmetric. The tragedy is concentrated heavily in the short term, but the survival stretches massively into the long term. If you do not understand how to separate the frequency of an event from the magnitude of its outcome, you will be paralyzed by the wrong numbers. This exact same blindness to asymmetry destroys people in the business world every single day. We are conditioned by our education system to believe that success is defined by how frequently we are correct. If you take a mathematics exam and get 90 out of 100 questions right, you are awarded a glowing grade. You are praised for your high frequency of correctness. But the financial markets and life itself do not grade you on a curve. You can be right 90% of the time and still be utterly destroyed by the 10% of the time you are wrong. Imagine a seasoned textile exporter based in Surat, shipping massive containers of luxury fabrics across the globe. He decides to employ a clever financial strategy to boost his company's income. Every month he essentially acts like an insurance company, taking on a small, seemingly invisible risk in the foreign exchange markets in exchange for a tiny, guaranteed premium. He calculates that there is a 99% chance the currency will remain stable, and only a 1% chance of a massive devaluation. For 5 years, the exporter is a genius. Month after month, the currency remains stable, and he collects his premium. He is right 99% of the time. He uses this steady stream of easy money to buy a beautiful farmhouse on the outskirts of the city and host lavish Diwali parties. Then the 1% probability materializes. A sovereign debt crisis in a faraway continent sends shockwaves through the global banking system, and the currency he bet on collapses overnight. Because his risk was highly asymmetric, the penalty for being wrong is astronomically larger than the reward for being right. In a single morning, the losses from that one rare event completely erase 5 years of accumulated profits, wipe out the entire working capital of his textile mill, and force him to liquidate his farmhouse at a steep discount. He was right almost every single day of his life, but because he was blind to the magnitude of the rare event, his high frequency of correctness meant absolutely nothing. This is the great deception of calm waters. We tend to look at a calm sea and assume it is safe, forgetting that the most devastating tsunamis are born in the deepest, quietest oceans. In risk management, this is known as the illusion of the hidden generator. When a specific strategy or a specific career yields small, incredibly steady returns with zero visible volatility, human beings are naturally drawn to it. We flock to the safety of a steady paycheck or a predictable business model. But very often, the absence of small, daily fluctuations is simply masking the buildup of a massive hidden pressure. The longer the water remains calm, the more people are lured into the trap, borrowing money and expanding their lifestyles based on the assumption of permanent stability. When the storm finally breaks, it is completely unexpected, and it destroys everyone who refused to believe in the possibility of a rare event. The people who survive and thrive in a world of uncertainty do the exact opposite. They structure their lives and their businesses to embrace a completely different kind of asymmetry. Instead of picking up pennies on a train track, enjoying small, frequent rewards while ignoring a massive, catastrophic risk, they choose to endure small, frequent, and manageable losses in exchange for the possibility of a massive, life-changing gain. They understand that it is perfectly acceptable to be wrong 70% of the time, as long as the cost of being wrong is just a few scratches, and the reward for being right in the remaining 30% is an empire. If you want to protect yourself from the hidden risks of reality, you must learn to stop asking how likely an event is to happen and start asking what will happen to you if it does. You must stop seeking the psychological comfort of being right every day, and instead build a fortress that allows you to survive being wrong. The world is not a balanced scale. It is a wildly shifting landscape where a single unforeseen breeze can topple a skyscraper and a single well-placed seed can grow into a forest. True wisdom lies in knowing exactly which side of that asymmetric equation you are standing on. Chapter 5. The Problem with Past Data. Imagine a majestic, centuries-old fortress in the heart of Rajasthan. For generations, the royal family has meticulously documented every siege, every battle, and every skirmish in the region. The fortress walls are impossibly thick, the gates are reinforced with heavy iron, and the vantage points offer a clear view of any approaching army for miles. For 300 years, no invading force has ever managed to breach the perimeter. If you were an analyst living inside those walls, you might look at your ledger of 300 years of perfect safety and conclude with absolute mathematical certainty that the fortress is unconquerable. You have over 100,000 days of hard empirical data proving your absolute security. Then, one quiet evening, a small band of mercenaries does not even bother looking at the gates. They simply bribe a disgruntled local guard to poison the fortress's single freshwater well. In a matter of days, the unconquerable fortress falls from the inside without a single stone being scratched. This is the devastating flaw at the heart of human knowledge. We are desperate for certainty, so we look to the past as if it were an infallible map of the future. We gather data, we build massive spreadsheets, we look at a long, uninterrupted streak of success, a booming property market, a consistently rising stock, a stable career, and we mistake it for a universal law of nature. Philosophers have agonized over this dangerous illusion for centuries. It is the fundamental problem of how we gather and trust knowledge. You can observe a phenomenon 1,000,000 times, and your confidence will grow with every single observation. But it only takes one single, unexpected exception to completely destroy everything you thought you knew. Think of a devoted ornithologist who spends his entire life exploring the dense forests of the Western Ghats. He observes tens of thousands of crows. Every single one of them is pitch black. He meticulously logs these sightings in his leather-bound journals. Over decades, he writes acclaimed research papers establishing the absolute, undeniable biological fact that all crows are black. His evidence is staggering. His dataset is flawless. But his entire life's work is incredibly fragile. It rests on a dangerous assumption. Because one afternoon, a traveler arrives from a remote, previously undiscovered island carrying a single albino crow in a wooden cage. In a fraction of a second, the existence of that single white crow vaporizes the validity of 10,000 black crows. The ornithologist's past data was entirely accurate, yet the grand conclusion he drew from it was fatally flawed. In the modern business world, we are drowning in data, but we are starving for wisdom. We have access to decades of market histories, consumer trends, and economic indicators. We hire armies of analysts to mine this data, looking for hidden patterns. When they find a pattern that has held true for 10 years, they convince themselves they have discovered a permanent law of commerce, and they invest thousands of crores of capital into it. This is naive empiricism. It is the dangerous belief that raw observation is a substitute for rigorous, critical thinking. These analysts are just like the people inside the Rajasthani fortress, obsessively measuring the thickness of the sturdy gates and completely ignoring the vulnerability of the well. They believe that because they have data, they have the truth. They do not realize that data is often just a historical record of what has not failed yet. How, then, do we survive in a world where the past cannot guarantee the future? We must adopt the mindset of a true, uncompromising skeptic. A rigorous, brilliant mind does not seek to prove itself right. It actively seeks to prove itself wrong. Most people build a theory about their business or their investments and then spend their lives searching for evidence to confirm it. They read the news articles that agree with them. They surround themselves with people who share their views. A truly resilient thinker does the exact opposite. They build a theory and then aggressively hunt for the one piece of evidence that will destroy it. If you believe your business model is flawless, do not look for the clients who love it. Hunt for the specific rare conditions that would completely bankrupt it. A theory, a strategy, or a worldview is only valuable if you know exactly what would prove it false. If you cannot define the exact conditions that would destroy your belief, you are not holding a rational belief at all. You are holding a blind superstition disguised as intellect. True knowledge is not about accumulating mountains of confirming evidence. It is about holding ideas that have survived your own most brutal attempts to tear them down. This brings us to a profound, practical way to navigate life and risk. Since we cannot perfectly predict the future based on the past, we must make a deliberate wager with the universe. We must accept the fundamental asymmetry of knowledge. We can certainly use history, data, and past performance to guide our daily actions, to make aggressive bets, and to seek out new opportunities. It is perfectly fine to assume the sun will rise tomorrow because it rose today, but we must never, under any circumstances, use past data to measure our maximum potential risk. We must accept that the worst-case scenario has likely never happened before, which means it will not show up in any of our historical spreadsheets. The survivors in life, the truly resilient entrepreneurs, the enduring investors, the wise leaders, operate with this dual mindset. They are bold in their daily pursuits, but intensely paranoid in their structural protections. They know that the past is a useful companion, but a terrible master. They walk through the world fully aware that the white crow is out there, waiting in the shadows. Instead of pretending it does not exist, they build their lives, their portfolios, and their businesses so that when the unexpected finally arrives, it brings a harsh lesson, not absolute destruction. Chapter 6. The Graveyard of Invisible Losers. There is a very specific kind of misery that can only be found at the absolute pinnacle of success. Imagine a highly skilled, fiercely dedicated neurosurgeon living in one of the most exclusive, ultra-luxury high-rise apartment buildings in South Mumbai. This surgeon is a marvel of human endurance. He operates for 12 hours a day, holds life and death in his hands, and earns an astronomical income that places him in the top fraction of a percent of the entire country's earners. He has saved diligently, built a pristine reputation, and provided his family with a life of absolute material comfort. By any rational global standard, this man has conquered the world. Yet, on many evenings, his spouse stands in the marble-clad elevator of their building and feels a crushing, humiliating sense of failure. Why does this happen? It happens because of the people sharing that elevator. The surgeon and his family live in a building favored by the absolute titans of the modern economy. Their neighbors are third-generation industrial barons, aggressive corporate raiders, and tech founders who sold their companies for thousands of crores before their 30th birthdays. When the surgeon's spouse interacts with the other families, she is constantly exposed to a level of staggering, effortless wealth that makes her husband's grueling, sweat-soaked medical career look almost pitiable. She wonders why her husband, who topped his medical college and works himself to the bone, cannot afford the private jets, the spontaneous month-long European holidays, and the massive diamond necklaces flaunted by the neighbors. She feels that they are falling behind, trapped at the very bottom of the social ladder. This emotional torture is the direct result of a profound statistical illusion. The spouse is judging her family's success using a deeply corrupted sample. If she were to compare her husband to his high school classmates, he would be the undisputed champion of the group. If she compared him to his peers from medical school, he would still be in the top percentile. But she is not doing that. She is comparing him only to the people who managed to buy an apartment in that specific, ultra-exclusive building. By choosing to live there, the family has entirely eliminated the average person from their daily view. And more importantly, they have completely eliminated the losers. They are surrounded exclusively by the most extreme winners in the economic lottery. Because the invisible masses who did not make it are out of sight, the environment warps the mind, making a spectacular hard-earned victory feel like a miserable defeat. This optical illusion, where we only see the people who survived and thrived while the casualties vanish into thin air, distorts far more than just our personal happiness. It completely corrupts our understanding of how to achieve success in the first place. Consider the incredibly popular advice dispensed by wealth gurus and financial bestsellers regarding the habits of the rich. We are frequently told that the secret to becoming a millionaire is surprisingly boring. You must simply be extremely frugal. These experts study a group of wealthy people and discover that many of them do not drive flashy sports cars. They do not wear designer clothes, and they live in modest, older homes. The experts conclude that these people became rich precisely because they postponed their pleasure, saved every spare rupee, and quietly accumulated their wealth over decades. This narrative is fiercely appealing. It is democratic, comforting, and gives us a profound sense of control. It tells us that if we just skip our expensive morning coffees and drive a reliable second-hand sedan, we too are guaranteed to join the ranks of the elite. But this advice is fundamentally flawed because the research behind it is infected with a double dose of blindness. The first layer of this blindness is that the researchers only interview the frugal people who actually ended up rich. They are studying the survivors. What they completely fail to document are the countless individuals who practiced the exact same relentless frugality, hoarded all their cash, and then invested it in the wrong place. Imagine the man who skipped every luxury for 30 years, only to invest his life savings in a friend's promising manufacturing business that ultimately went bankrupt. Or the woman who diligently saved her salary, but kept it in a currency that suffered a massive, unexpected devaluation. These people are the invisible losers. Because they did not become millionaires, they are never interviewed for the best-selling books. If we were to include all the frugal people who saved their money but lost it to bad luck or poor investments, the magical connection between buying cheap clothes and becoming a millionaire would instantly dissolve. The second layer of blindness is even more dangerous because it ignores the massive, invisible winds of history. The wealthy people featured in these studies almost always accumulated their fortunes during a specific, unprecedented era of asset inflation. They happened to be saving and investing their money during a historical period where the stock market and real estate values were multiplying at a staggering rate. They were riding a massive global financial boom. If you were to take those exact same frugal habits and that exact same investment strategy and drop those people into a prolonged 20-year economic depression, their portfolios would be decimated. To praise their modesty without acknowledging the massive, lucky tailwind of the historical market cycle is to fundamentally misunderstand how wealth is created. We must learn to walk through the world acutely aware of the graveyard of invisible losers. Whenever you are presented with a success story, a foolproof strategy, or a brilliant new business model, your first instinct should not be to marvel at the winner. Your first instinct must be to ask, where are the others? Where are the thousands of people who did the exact same things, took the exact same risks, and woke up with nothing? History is a choir composed entirely of the surviving voices. The dead do not get to sing. If we want to truly understand the mechanics of life, business, and risk, we have to stop listening only to the noisy survivors and start training our ears to hear the profound, instructive silence of those who did not make it. Chapter 7. Coincidences and False Patterns. If you walk into a bustling restaurant and order a simple omelette, you will know within the very first bite if the chef in the kitchen possesses actual skill. Cooking is a transparent profession. A fraud cannot accidentally fry a perfect egg, and a novice cannot repeatedly deliver flawless meals through sheer luck. If the food is consistently good, you can safely conclude that the chef has spent years mastering the heat, the timing, and the ingredients. But the world of business, and particularly the world of financial markets, does not operate like a kitchen. It is entirely possible for a person with absolutely no skill, no foresight, and no genuine understanding of economics to generate a flawless, highly profitable track record simply by floating on a current of pure, unadulterated luck. It is vastly easier to buy and sell than it is to fry an egg, because buying and selling can be done successfully by a blindfolded monkey, provided there are enough monkeys playing the game. To truly grasp how terrifyingly easy it is to manufacture a financial genius, imagine a grand hypothetical experiment. Suppose we gather 10,000 young, eager graduates fresh out of college and place them in the heart of Mumbai's financial district. We give them each a crisp suit, a desk, and a trading account. However, we do not teach them anything about valuing companies or analyzing markets. Instead, we give them a single 1 rupee coin and instruct them to flip it once a year. If it lands on heads, they buy the market. If it lands on tails, they sell. We establish one brutal rule for this experiment. The moment a graduate has a losing year, they are immediately fired, their desk is cleared, and they are banished from the financial district forever. At the end of the first year, roughly 5,000 of these young traders will have flipped heads. They make a handsome profit and keep their jobs. The other 5,000 flip-tails lose money and are quietly escorted out of the building. At the end of the second year, 2,500 traders remain. By the end of the third year, we are down to 1,250. We continue this ruthless culling for 5 straight years. At the end of the fifth year, by the sheer unyielding laws of probability, we will be left with a cohort of about 312 young men and women who have generated massive, uninterrupted profits for 5 consecutive years. Now, step outside the confines of our hypothetical experiment and look at how the real world would treat these 300 survivors. They would be hailed as undisputed visionaries. They would be invited onto primetime financial news networks to share their deep philosophical insights on the global economy. They would wear bespoke suits, drive luxury sports cars, and write best-selling autobiographies detailing the rigorous morning routines and brilliant strategic frameworks that supposedly built their empires. The public would entrust them with thousands of crores in retirement savings, desperate to capture a piece of their magic. No one would ever suspect that their entire track record was built on a series of random coin flips, because no one is looking at the invisible graveyard of the 9,688 traders who did the exact same thing but happened to flip tails. We are biologically programmed to look at a successful track record and assume it is the result of competence, completely ignoring the size of the initial crowd that started the race. This dangerous vulnerability to coincidences is frequently weaponized by those who understand it. Imagine a hard-working, middle-class shop owner in Delhi who receives a mysterious message on his phone one Monday morning from an unknown number. The message simply predicts that a specific highly volatile stock will rise by the end of the week. The shop owner ignores it, but out of curiosity, he checks the stock on Friday. The prediction was perfectly accurate. The following month, he receives another message from the same number predicting a massive drop in a different sector. Again, the prediction is flawless. This happens for 6 consecutive months. 6 times the anonymous messenger predicts the chaotic movements of the market with the terrifying precision of a prophet. By the 7th month, the messenger reaches out with a proposition. For a hefty fee of 5 lakh rupees, he will share his ultimate guaranteed investment strategy for the coming year. The shop owner, completely mesmerized by the 6 months of perfect predictions, drains his family's savings account and transfers the money, convinced he has found a financial savior. He does not realize he has just fallen victim to one of the oldest statistical scams in the world. The anonymous messenger is not a prophet. He is simply a man with a large database of phone numbers and an understanding of probability. In the first month, the scammer sent out 10,000 messages. To 5,000 people, he predicted the stock would rise. To the other 5,000, he predicted it would fall. When the stock rose, he simply discarded the 5,000 people who received the wrong prediction. The next month, he took the remaining 5,000 people and divided them again, sending a positive prediction to half and a negative one to the other. He repeated this halving process every single month. By the 6th month, there were a few hundred people who, by pure chance, had received a flawless string of predictions. To the shop owner, the messages felt like destiny, a miraculous coincidence tailored specifically for him. But from the perspective of the scammer, the shop owner was just the inevitable mathematical output of a massive random numbers game. We fall for these traps because our brains are fundamentally wired to seek meaning, narrative, and causality, even when absolutely none exists. Think about the last time you were traveling in a remote foreign city, perhaps wandering through a crowded market in Bangkok or navigating a train station in London, and you suddenly bumped into a childhood friend from your old neighborhood in Jaipur. You likely felt a profound, electric shock of astonishment. You probably told the story for years, marveling at the incredible, astronomical odds of 2 people from the same street colliding thousands of miles from home. You might have even felt that the universe was sending you a deeply spiritual sign. But if we strip away the emotion and look at the raw probability, the magic quickly dissipates. It is true that the odds of you meeting that specific friend in that specific market at that exact second are incredibly low. But the odds of you meeting any person you have ever known in any of the thousands of locations you will visit over your lifetime at any given moment are actually remarkably high. We are constantly moving through a dense, swirling soup of random events. When 2 paths cross, we are shocked. forgetting the millions of times we walked through an airport or a market and did not recognize a single soul. Our minds highlight the one striking coincidence and completely delete the vast, silent ocean of non-events that surrounded it. This desperate need to find patterns in the noise becomes incredibly destructive when we apply it to serious research and data analysis. In the modern era, a young data scientist can sit in a high-tech office in Hyderabad, feed decades of global economic data into a massive supercomputer, and ask the machine to find correlations. If you throw enough computing power at random data, the machine will eventually find a pattern that looks statistically perfect. The computer might discover that over the last 20 years, the stock market has always surged exactly 3 days after a heavy rainfall in a specific district in Kerala. A naive analyst will look at this perfect historical correlation, build a complex economic theory around it, and bet millions of rupees on the next monsoon. But it is just a spurious correlation, a meaningless ghost in the machine. A random series of data will always exhibit some kind of pattern if you stare at it long enough, just as you can always find the shape of a face in a cloudy sky if you look hard enough. The most tragic manifestation of our blindness to coincidence occurs in the realm of health and healing. Every so often, the media will sensationalize the story of a person who was diagnosed with a terminal, incurable illness, but who miraculously recovered after consuming a rare, unproven herbal remedy or visiting a mystical healer. The patient will sit in front of the cameras, weeping with genuine gratitude, offering a powerful emotional testimonial. The public watches this and immediately assumes a causal link. The herbal remedy cured the disease. What the public does not understand is the medical phenomenon of spontaneous remission. In very rare, statistically predictable instances, the human immune system will suddenly and inexplicably eradicate a disease entirely on its own. This tiny fraction of patients would have recovered whether they drank the herbal remedy, drank a glass of tap water, or chewed on a piece of cardboard. Because they happened to be taking the herbal remedy when the spontaneous remission occurred, they attribute their survival to the healer. Meanwhile, the silent thousands who took the exact same herbal remedy and tragically passed away are never interviewed on television. Their silence is the missing data. To navigate a world overflowing with coincidences, we must develop a profound, almost unnatural discipline. We must learn to suppress our desperate, biological urge to connect the dots when no connection exists. We must accept that a flawless track record might just be a lucky coin flip, that a miraculous prediction might just be a numbers game, and that a striking coincidence is usually just the inevitable output of a very large, very random universe. Only by embracing the cold, hard reality of chance can we begin to protect ourselves from the false prophets and the dangerous illusions that surround us. Chapter 8. The Winner-Take-All Society. We are taught from a very young age that life is a beautifully balanced scale. We are told that if we put in a certain amount of effort, we will receive a proportional amount of reward. We believe that hard work yields steady, linear progress, much like walking up a predictable flight of stairs. But the real world does not operate on a linear scale, and it is profoundly, ruthlessly unfair in a way that defies all of our childhood lessons. Life is fiercely non-linear, meaning that a microscopic advantage can translate into a colossal, disproportionate payoff, while a tiny disadvantage can leave you with absolutely nothing. To visualize this invisible force, imagine you are sitting on the warm shores of a beach in Goa, carefully building a towering sandcastle. You meticulously add grain after grain, scooping wet sand and patting it into shape. For a long time, the structure grows steadily and predictably. It feels stable. Then you drop one single, seemingly insignificant grain of sand onto the very top of the highest spire. That one tiny grain triggers a catastrophic chain reaction, and the entire magnificent structure topples into a flat, formless heap. A microscopic, linear input just generated a massive, non-linear output. This phenomenon is the hidden architecture of the universe, governing everything from the weather to the global economy. A butterfly flapping its wings in one hemisphere can create a devastating hurricane in another. Nowhere is this non-linear unfairness more visible and more heartbreaking than in the pursuit of fame and status. Consider the thousands of aspiring actors who arrive at the train stations of Mumbai every single day. They are all fiercely driven, they are all intensely attractive, and they all possess a very similar, high level of raw, theatrical talent. They spend their days sitting in crowded, sweltering waiting rooms, hoping for a break. One afternoon, a casting director sits in a sterile office, exhausted after watching hundreds of identical, flawless auditions. A young actor walks in. He is objectively no better than the 50 men who walked in before him. But perhaps he happens to be wearing a specific shade of blue that triggers a fond, subconscious childhood memory in the director's mind, or perhaps the director just finished a refreshing cup of chai and happens to be in a slightly more forgiving mood. A tiny, invisible, random nudge occurs. The actor gets the lead role. Because he lands that single role, he is suddenly visible to the public. Because the public sees him, other prominent directors decide they want him in their films. Within a year, his face is plastered on towering billboards across the nation. He is invited to exclusive high society galas, and he moves into a sprawling, sea-facing mansion in Bandra. Meanwhile, his peers from that exact same waiting room, peers who possess the exact same level of dedication and dramatic skill, are left serving coffee in suburban cafes, agonizing over their biological clocks and waiting for a magical break that will never arrive. The winner did not possess a divine, infinitely superior talent. He was simply the beneficiary of a microscopic random advantage that compounded into an astronomical winner-take-all victory. This brutal dynamic dictates the corporate and technological worlds with the exact same merciless rhythm. We want to believe that the best, most efficient products naturally rise to the top because the free market is a perfectly rational judge of quality, but this is a comforting fantasy. Imagine a brilliant, obsessive software engineer in Bengaluru who spends 3 years locked in his room building a revolutionary, lightning-fast digital payment application. His code is a flawless work of art. Across town, a different, less talented developer creates a clunky, frustrating, inferior payment app. But by sheer blind chance, a popular local merchant decides to download the clunky app one afternoon just to try it out. A dozen customers are forced to download the inferior app simply to pay that specific merchant. Because those 12 customers now have it on their phones, they ask their friends to download it so they can easily split restaurant bills. Within a few short months, the entire country is using the clunky, inferior application. Why? Simply because everyone else is already using it. This is a purely circular, self-feeding loop where people patronize a product merely because other people are patronizing it. The brilliant engineer with the objectively superior product goes entirely bankrupt, while the creator of the inferior app becomes a billionaire, celebrated on the covers of international business magazines as a visionary titan of technology. The winner was not the most deserving. The winner was simply the one who caught the initial random gust of wind that ignited an unstoppable chain reaction. Success breeds success, pulling all the oxygen out of the room and leaving the competitors to suffocate. To truly internalize how unfair this is, imagine a large, earthen pot filled with an equal number of red and black marbles. In a standard theoretical game of probability, if you draw a red marble, you put it back, and your odds of drawing red on the next turn remain exactly 50%. But the real world does not play by these clean mathematical rules. In the real world, every single time you draw a red marble, the universe rewards you by throwing 5 more red marbles into the pot. Your probability of winning increases exponentially simply because you happened to win in the past. The game is fundamentally, irreversibly rigged by your previous momentum. A tiny head start transforms into an insurmountable, monopolistic empire, resulting in astonishing successes for the few and a massive silent graveyard of failures for the many. Yet, we must not view randomness purely as a villain. Sometimes it is the only force capable of saving us from our own paralyzing logic. Imagine a hungry, thirsty donkey standing in a dusty field, positioned at the exact halfway point between a bucket of fresh water and a large bale of hay. The donkey is a perfectly rational creature. He calculates that the distance to the water and the distance to the hay are mathematically identical. Because he cannot logically justify choosing one over the other, he is trapped in a permanent stalemate. He stands completely frozen in place, unable to make a decision, until he eventually collapses and dies of both starvation and dehydration. What could have saved this highly rational creature? A completely random, illogical nudge. If a sudden gust of wind had startled the donkey, Pushing him just a fraction of an inch toward the water, the perfect symmetry of his problem would have been shattered. He would have found himself slightly closer to the bucket, causing him to finally take a drink, then walk over to eat the hay, and ultimately survive. In a deeply complex, overwhelming world, we frequently find ourselves trapped in mental stalemates, agonizing over perfectly balanced choices. In these moments, a random coin flip, submitting to the chaotic will of the universe, is often the most powerful and liberating decision-making tool we possess. We are deeply uncomfortable with this bipolar reality, a world where you either capture the entire kingdom or are left standing in the cold with absolutely nothing. We crave a universe that is fair, proportional, and strictly obedient to our hard work, but the tiniest shift in the wind can crown you a king or erase you from history. Once we accept this brutal, non-linear dynamic, we can finally stop tying our entire self-worth to our ultimate output. We begin to realize that our brains are simply not designed to process this level of chaotic unfairness. And as we are about to explore, this biological inability to understand the true nature of probability goes far beyond simple mathematics. It is deeply physically wired into the very tissues of our minds.
Chapter 9. The Blindness of the Brain. Imagine you have a few days off in the middle of winter, and you are entirely torn between two drastically different holiday destinations. You could fly to the mist-covered, snow-draped mountains of Shimla, or you could travel south to lounge under a beach umbrella on the pristine, sun-baked sands of the Maldives. You are completely indifferent between the two options, so you leave the final decision to a simple coin toss by your spouse. In your mind, you can perfectly and vividly visualize standing in the freezing mountain snow, wrapped in a heavy coat. You can also perfectly visualize the warm turquoise ocean water lapping at your feet. But try to mentally visualize a mathematical combination of the two. Try to close your eyes and imagine yourself 50% in the Himalayan snow and 50% on the tropical sand. You will find it impossible because our brains are completely incapable of processing two mutually exclusive states at once. Left to our own biological devices, we cannot visualize a probabilistic average. We can only conjure up concrete, absolute scenarios. This profound biological limitation exists because of the highly specific environment that forged our DNA. If you were to transport yourself back a few thousand years to a small, enclosed agricultural settlement, your daily life would be incredibly linear and localized. The information you received traveled slowly, entirely limited by the physical speed of a walking messenger. If someone committed a crime in your village, the suspect pool was extremely narrow, and you certainly did not need to understand complex mathematics or probability to survive your daily routines. In fact, the human beings who survived and successfully passed down their genes were often those who overreacted to threats. The ancient farmer whose brain imparted higher odds to the danger of death, the one who heard a rustle in the grass and instantly assumed it was a hungry predator rather than the wind, survived because of his paranoia. Paranoia, rather than calm statistical analysis, is our deepest evolutionary inheritance. We have taken these ancient paranoid pattern-seeking brains and thrust them into a modern world overflowing with complex information. The result is a society that is fundamentally blind to probability, often with terrifying consequences. Imagine a high-profile criminal trial taking place in a sprawling modern metropolis. The fate of a human being hangs in the balance. The defense lawyer stands before the jury and argues that a specific piece of forensic evidence could theoretically belong to 1 in 100,000 people, implying that dozens of people walking around the city could be the culprit. The jury nods, swayed by the seemingly solid logic, but they and the lawyer are completely ignoring the mathematical law of joint probability. When you combine the forensic evidence with the fact that the suspect was near the scene, had a clear motive, and lacked an alibi, the mathematical odds against him multiply exponentially into the millions or billions. Yet because our brains struggle to compound probabilities, a glib speaker can easily manipulate a courtroom into setting a guilty person free, or worse, convicting an innocent one. We possess the technology to launch satellites into orbit, yet we make profound legal and life decisions using the cognitive tools of cavemen. This biological blindness is relentlessly exploited by the modern media. Turn on any financial television channel during the afternoon. You will see highly charismatic experts looking deeply into the camera, explaining exactly why the national stock market dropped by a microscopic fraction of a percent that morning. They will blame currency fluctuations, political rumors, or international trade tariffs. But in reality, a tiny percentage drop in a massive global market is nothing more than absolute meaningless noise. It does not warrant any explanation whatsoever. It is the equivalent of trying to explain why one single grain of sand shifted on a windy beach. Yet the journalist is paid to provide an explanation, and our brains are biologically desperate to hear a coherent story. We cannot handle the uncomfortable truth that things often fluctuate for absolutely no reason at all. So we listen to the experts and we fill our heads with toxic, misleading narratives that convince us we understand a world that is actually driven by random chaos. Because we are so desperate to link cause and effect, we end up manufacturing patterns out of pure randomness. Think of a highly educated, pragmatic business owner who has a spectacularly profitable week in the markets. He happens to be wearing a specific, slightly faded blue tie that day. The next week, facing an important negotiation, he unconsciously reaches for that exact same blue tie. He knows, intellectually, that the fabric around his neck has absolutely no physical impact on the global economy or the outcome of a business deal. But his primitive brain has noticed a correlation and desperately forged a causal link, giving birth to a gambler's superstition. Decades ago, researchers placed hungry birds in an enclosed box designed to deliver food at completely random intervals. Because the food arrived without any predictable pattern, the birds went mad trying to figure out what was causing it. One bird would rhythmically swing its head against a corner. Another would spin in frantic circles, firmly believing that their specific, bizarre dance was magically triggering the food dispenser. They developed deep, hardwired rituals in response to their ingrained statistical machinery. As human beings, we are no different. When we are exposed to random success or random failure, we spin in our own circles, creating elaborate rituals and superstitious habits to exert a false sense of control over an uncontrollable universe. The most frustrating aspect of our biological blindness is that simply understanding the mathematics of probability does not cure us. You can be a world-class statistician and still feel a surge of irrational panic when the market drops, or a surge of unjustified arrogance when you win a lucky bet. We think with our emotions, and there is no way around it. Our hearts will always respond to the primitive signals they were designed to hear, regardless of what our logic tells us. True mastery over uncertainty is not about eradicating our human flaws because we cannot rewrite our DNA. It is about realizing that our brains are constantly lying to us, and putting strict physical and structural barriers in place to prevent those lies from dictating our actions.
Chapter 10. Embracing Uncertainty. There is a profound, almost terrifying freedom in realizing that you do not have to be right. Throughout our lives, we are taught to construct our beliefs like heavy, impenetrable fortresses. We are told that strong leaders have unwavering convictions, that brilliant minds possess absolute certainty, and that changing your opinion is a sign of weakness or intellectual cowardice. But in a universe ruled by hidden risks and random, unpredictable chaos, absolute certainty is the most dangerous trap a human being can fall into. To truly survive and thrive, we must cultivate a mind that is entirely fluid, capable of holding a belief intensely today and ruthlessly discarding it tomorrow. To understand the power of this mental flexibility, imagine a legendary debating championship at a prestigious university in New Delhi. The auditorium is packed with thousands of students, professors, and journalists. On the first day of the tournament, a brilliant young student takes the stage to argue in favor of aggressive, unbridled free market capitalism. For an hour, he is absolutely spellbinding. He uses flawless logic, razor-sharp rhetoric, and deep historical analysis to prove that free markets are the ultimate driver of human prosperity. The audience is mesmerized, completely swayed by the undeniable power of his intellect. He receives a standing ovation. Now, imagine that on the second day of the tournament, due to a sudden change in the debate format, this exact same student is forced to take the podium and argue the exact opposite position. He must now argue that unbridled free markets are destructive and that heavy state intervention is the only path to a just society. Most people would stumble, paralyzed by the contradiction, but this student steps up to the microphone and delivers a speech that is even more devastatingly persuasive than the day before. He systematically dismantles every single point he made the previous afternoon. He exposes the hidden flaws in his own prior logic. He sways the very same audience to the exact opposite conclusion, leaving the auditorium in stunned silence. What this young debater demonstrated was not hypocrisy. It was the ultimate mastery of uncertainty. He understood that any argument, any financial model, and any worldview is simply a temporary perspective, not an eternal law of physics. We often form opinions based on the limited information we have at a given moment, but instead of treating those opinions as temporary hypotheses, we marry them. We invest our egos in them. If a business leader publicly declares that a certain product line is the future of his company and the market immediately proves him wrong, his ego will often prevent him from reversing course. He will ignore the dropping sales, blame the marketing department, and burn through millions of rupees trying to force the universe to align with his original prediction. The greatest, most resilient operators in the world do the exact opposite. They are intensely self-critical. They walk into their offices every morning and actively search for the piece of information that proves their current strategy is completely wrong. If they find it, they do not feel shame. They do not hold agonizing meetings to justify their past mistakes. They simply drop their old belief instantly, reverse their position, and move forward without a shred of embarrassment. They understand that probability is not just a mathematical formula. It is a deep philosophical acceptance of our own ignorance. The only way to beat a constantly shifting environment is to be even more adaptable than the environment itself. But even with a perfectly fluid mind, even with the most careful risk management and the deepest understanding of probability, we must accept a harsh, undeniable truth. We will never fully tame the beast of randomness. The white crow will eventually fly out of the shadows. A market will crash, a sudden health crisis will emerge, or a massive, unforeseen global event will wipe out our carefully laid plans. When you play the game of life long enough, you will eventually encounter a blow that you did not predict and cannot control. In these moments, when the math fails and the fortress crumbles, we are left with only one remaining defense mechanism. That ultimate defense is personal elegance. Imagine a formidable, aging business magnate residing in a grand heritage hotel in Jaipur, surrounded by the beautiful physical manifestations of a lifetime of relentless work and spectacular success. He has built an empire of manufacturing plants and logistics hubs. He is respected, feared, and admired. Then, over the course of a single week, a catastrophic, unpredictable shift in global trade policies entirely wipes out his industry. His foreign buyers vanish overnight. His factories are shuttered. His massive lines of credit are called in by the banks. In a matter of days, his entire net worth evaporates into thin air. He is left completely ruined. How does a person respond to this level of random, unmerited destruction? The natural human instinct is to weep, to scream at the heavens, to blame the politicians, and to drown in a toxic pool of bitterness. Most people would call press conferences to complain about the unfairness of the system, desperately clinging to the illusion that they were robbed. But this magnate chooses a different path. On the morning his bankruptcy becomes official, he does not hide in his room. He wakes up early and bathes. He puts on his finest, most immaculately tailored suit. He ensures his posture is perfectly straight. He walks down to the lobby of the hotel, greets the staff by name, and pays his final bills with a calm, steady hand. He walks out into the blinding heat of the street with absolute, unbreakable dignity. He never complains. He never begs for pity. He never allows the outside world to see a single drop of his internal agony. This is the ultimate victory over randomness. Lady Fortune can reach into your life and take away your wealth, your business, your status, and your comfort. She can hand your hard-earned rewards to a reckless fool across the street. She can rewrite the rules of the game while you are playing it. But she cannot touch your dignity unless you willingly hand it over. When you face the destructive force of chance with silent, unyielding elegance, you strip the universe of its power to humiliate you. As we conclude our journey through the hidden role of chance, we must look at our lives through a newly washed window. We now know that the world is flooded with noise, bursting with invisible losers, and heavily tilted by non-linear advantages. We know that our own brains are wired to deceive us, constantly finding patterns in the dust and assigning skill to pure luck. We cannot rewire our DNA, and we cannot predict the storms that are currently brewing beyond the horizon. But we can control how we build our ships, and we can control how we stand at the helm. We can withdraw from the toxic minute-by-minute chatter of the daily news, protecting our minds from the anxiety of meaningless fluctuations. We can embrace a profound skepticism, refusing to be mesmerized by the articulate jargon of temporary winners. We can seek out asymmetric opportunities where our risks are small and our potential rewards are vast. And above all, we can walk through this chaotic, unpredictable world with a quiet, graceful humility, knowing that while we are all vulnerable to the rolling dice of fate, our character remains entirely in our own hands.